When the palace prepared for Catherine's coronation, no one expected her to make a demand so shocking. It shook the foundations of the monarchy. She would not take the crown unless Camilla's family was erased from royal affairs. For weeks, the anticipation had been building, and royal insiders whispered about floral arrangements, security preparations, and the symbolic moments that would define the next queen's legacy. But buried beneath the sparkle of state jewels and ceremonial rehearsals was a tension no one dared name out loud. Behind the gilded walls, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was not celebrating. She was refusing. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Catherine, known for her polished composure, began canceling private sessions with coronation planners. Invitations to attend pre-coronation events were declined without explanation. Senior aides grew concerned. What initially appeared to be exhaustion or overscheduling soon spiraled into something far more unsettling. Palace whispers turned into quiet dread as Catherine reportedly stopped responding altogether to requests for protocol reviews. Then came the meeting that would upend everything. In a private chamber with King Charles, Prince William, and two top advisors present, Catherine laid out her terms in a voice that, though calm, carried the weight of a thunderstorm. She would not be crowned until Camilla's family was removed from all royal affairs. Not eased out, not repositioned, removed. Permanently. The room fell into stunned silence. Charles, blindsided and visibly shaken, attempted to reason with her, but Catherine stood her ground. There was no room for compromise. What triggered such an extreme stand? Palace sources say Catherine's discomfort with Camilla's growing influence had been festering for years. But this was no longer about Camilla herself. It was about the people she brought with her. Catherine, fiercely protective of her children and their place in royal succession, had reportedly grown increasingly alarmed by how seamlessly Camilla's children and grandchildren were being woven into the monarchy's fabric. For Catherine, this wasn't just personal, it was generational. If she took the crown under these conditions, what legacy would she be endorsing? The aftermath was immediate and chaotic. Charles's loyalists erupted in panic, some urging him to stand firm, others advising swift appeasement. Camilla, present for part of the confrontation, reportedly left the room in tears. In hushed tones, aides discussed postponing the coronation or recasting it entirely. The palace press office went into overdrive, attempting to bury the story before it reached the tabloids. But it was too late. A single leak set the media ablaze. Catherine refuses the crown headlined across Europe within hours, and the monarchy suddenly found itself on the brink of a PR catastrophe. And yet, this wasn't about headlines for Catherine. It was about the soul of the crown itself. Her condition wasn't made out of spite. It was a declaration of principles, a refusal to allow a diluted legacy to masquerade as destiny. She wasn't just demanding the removal of Camilla's family, she was demanding a reckoning. But to understand the true weight of Catherine's threat, we must go back to when her unease with Camilla's family first began to fester behind palace walls. Catherine and Camilla's families were never cut from the same cloth and behind palace curtains. The silent clash between blood and step loyalty has been building for years. From the very beginning, Catherine's journey into royalty was defined by restraint, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to the institution. She entered the royal family not seeking power but embracing tradition, learning the codes, the silences, and the sacrifices it demanded. Her upbringing, while not aristocratic, had instilled in her a deep respect for the history and expectations surrounding the crown. To Catherine, royalty was not a stage. It was a responsibility passed down through generations, guarded by lineage and sacrifice. Camilla, on the other hand, had arrived through an entirely different door. Her path was not carved by the bloodline but through relentless perseverance and royal exception. Her relationship with Charles, once scandalous and forbidden, had evolved into reluctant acceptance, and eventually, an official title. But her entry had always been marred by the whispers of impropriety, by questions of legitimacy, by a cloud that never fully cleared. And when Camilla's family began appearing more and more frequently alongside royals at official events, that cloud darkened over Catherine's conscience. It wasn't just appearances, it was something deeper. The contrast between William's bloodline, his sons, the heirs of Diana, the living embodiment of a carefully preserved monarchy, and Camilla's grandchildren from a previous marriage, stirred silent outrage among traditionalists. Events once reserved for royal heirs now featured unfamiliar faces, children with no direct royal blood, suddenly treated as if they shared the throne's destiny. Catherine, who had fought for every ounce of approval, watched as Camilla's family glided in on sympathy and favoritism. Reports of tension were whispered among palace aides, and while no headlines shouted it, the divide was widening. Catherine's private frustrations began to grow as she witnessed Camilla's grandchildren take part in photo ops, stand near the king during ceremonies, and receive access that was once held sacred for direct royal lineage. Every move felt like a quiet invasion, like the crown was being diluted behind her back. And Charles, whether blinded by guilt or sentiment, brushed off Catherine's concerns, treating them as emotional overreactions rather than the strategic, institutional threat she knew they were. Behind the scenes, Catherine began acting with quiet precision. Insiders claimed she requested changes to seating charts, declined joint family appearances, and scheduled separate engagements for her children, all subtle efforts to distance George, Charlotte, and Louis from Camilla's growing influence. It was never about hate, it was about heritage. And while Catherine's actions were brushed off by many as coincidence or scheduling conflicts, those closest to the palace knew this was a carefully calculated stand. A silent protest from a future queen who saw the ground beneath the monarchy shifting and didn't like the direction. Still, Catherine said nothing publicly. She continued to smile, to wave, to kneel beside Camilla at church services. But behind her eyes, the conflict brewed like a storm gathering strength. Her silence was not surrender, it was strategy. She was waiting for the moment that would allow her to turn silent disapproval into undeniable action. And while Catherine stayed silent for years, a single public moment would ignite the firestorm that forced her to draw a line in the sand. It was meant to be a family-friendly public event, but one moment between Prince Louis and Camilla's grandson would spiral into a royal crisis no one saw coming. The gardens of Windsor had been transformed into a spectacle of charm and unity, a gathering crafted for cameras designed to showcase a modern, blended royal family embracing change. But beneath the manicured smiles and staged warmth, hidden tensions threatened to erupt. And they did, in a flash too quick for official cameras but too loud to be ignored. As the children mingled under the watchful eyes of attendants and photographers, an unsettling scene unfolded behind the hedges. Camilla's grandson reportedly pushed Prince Louis, mocking him loudly enough that staff nearby froze mid-step. The moment lasted seconds, but the impact reverberated through every corner of the palace. Catherine's response was immediate and icy. She did not shout, she didn't scold. She simply walked away, refusing to return to her designated seat beside Camilla. Palace aides, trained in damage control, moved quickly to patch the optics. But those who knew Catherine recognized what had just happened. This wasn't the reaction of a mother to a misbehaving child. It was the final snap of a woman who had watched the royal lines blur too far, for too long. No words were exchanged publicly between Catherine and Camilla for the rest of the day. No smiles, no glances, just a chasm that now everyone could feel. Back inside the palace, William exploded. The future king, known for his control and diplomacy, stormed into a meeting with security personnel, demanding to know how it had been allowed to happen. How a non-royal child had found himself in a position to physically harass the son of a direct heir. His fury wasn't just paternal, it was deeply symbolic. The heir to the throne had been publicly humiliated by a child with no claim to it. And William knew this wasn't just about Louis, it was about the future and everything the crown stood for. The footage, reportedly captured by multiple media outlets in attendance, was never released. Press offices were discreetly instructed to edit around the incident, and outlets were incentivized to stick to the official narrative. But the silence was too perfect. Online speculation ran rampant. Anonymous palace staff leaked details. Body language experts analyzed footage frame by frame. Hashtags exploded across platforms, questioning who really belonged in the royal spotlight and who never should have been there to begin with. And in the center of the chaos stood Catherine, silent, poised, and unrelenting. That single moment her child publicly mocked her place silently transformed her. No longer would she accept the excuse of blending families. No longer would she sit quietly while tradition was twisted to appease guilt. For Catherine, This wasn't about jealousy or rivalry. It was about protecting the soul of the monarchy, and shielding her children from being pawns in a crown increasingly pulled in too many directions. From that day forward, everything changed. Her stance hardened, her resolve crystallized. There would be no more blurred lines, no more forced smiles, no more compromises. The monarchy had always been about blood, duty, and legacy. And now, Catherine was ready to defend that legacy with fire. But Catherine's pain went deeper than a single event. It was the culmination of years of emotional wounds and silent betrayals that she could no longer ignore. Catherine played the perfect royal wife for years, but behind her poised smile was a woman suffocating in silence, as Camilla's family was slowly embedded into the monarchy's future. Every wave, every carefully chosen outfit, every smile captured by photographers, Catherine performed her role with near-flawless precision. To the public, she was grace incarnate. But behind palace walls, she was drowning. With each passing year, she watched the balance of power shift not just toward Camilla, but toward Camilla's lineage. What began as subtle inclusions soon became glaring placements. Appearances at state events, participation in royal charities, even the soft suggestion that Camilla's grandchildren were now part of the royal next generation. For Catherine, every decision that favored Camilla's family over royal blood felt like a betrayal not just of her children, but of the very essence of the monarchy. In rare, hushed conversations, Catherine confided in one woman who understood the magnitude of tradition more than anyone, Princess Anne. Together, they shared private moments away from cameras, exchanging knowing glances, quiet sighs, and solemn truths. Anne, ever loyal to the institution above all, never gave Catherine empty comfort. Instead, she offered clarity. "Protect the line," she once reportedly whispered, "because no one else will." Those words stayed with Catherine like a silent command. She wasn't just a wife anymore. She was the gatekeeper of a legacy. But as the weeks turned into years, her internal war deepened. Charles remained unmoved. Her attempts to privately voice her concerns were politely dismissed, rebranded as overprotectiveness or misinterpretation. "The family is evolving," he reportedly said. But Catherine saw it differently. She saw tradition unraveling thread by thread, replaced with a new narrative that blurred the very lines the monarchy was built to preserve. Her isolation grew, not because she lacked supporters, but because no one dared challenge the king's choices except her. Behind closed doors, those closest to Catherine revealed a side the world never saw. The strong, stoic figure who stood before millions would often retreat into herself in the quiet hours of the night. Confidantes spoke of her late walks through the palace grounds, eyes red from silent tears, lost in thought over what the monarchy was becoming and what that meant for George, Charlotte, and Louis. She wasn't just mourning a tradition, she was terrified of what would be left for her children once the dust of compromise settled. In those moments, one figure remained her beacon, Queen Elizabeth. Catherine clung to the former monarch's legacy like a lifeline. Everything she believed in honor, order, bloodline, duty was embodied by Elizabeth's reign. But with each appearance of Camilla's family, with every bypassing of protocol in the name of inclusion, Catherine felt that legacy slipping through her fingers. The crown was no longer just a symbol. It was a battlefield, and she was being told to stand down. Still, the pressure mounted. Palace officials urged her to comply, to smile through the discomfort, to keep the peace for the sake of unity. But unity built on quiet erasure was no unity at all. It was surrender. And Catherine was never built to surrender. But when news of Catherine's ultimatum broke through the Iron Palace gates, it became clear that this was more than a private rebellion. This was a reckoning. Within hours of the leak, the monarchy entered full damage control. Phones rang non-stop, aides went silent, and Camilla's allies launched a quiet war to protect their own. The headline exploded like a thunderclap. "Future Queen refuses the crown?" In a single stroke, Catherine's private ultimatum had become a global spectacle. The palace press office, usually a fortress of control, scrambled for words. But this time, there were none. No carefully curated images, no diplomatic statements, just a vacuum. And in that vacuum, chaos reigned. News anchors speculated. Columnists dissected every public appearance from the past month. Royal watchers revisited old interviews with a fresh lens, finding new meaning in every sidelong glance. The monarchy, built on tradition and silence, now found itself drowning in noise. Behind the scenes, Camilla's camp moved swiftly. They weren't blindsided, they were furious. Allies close to her demanded emergency consultations. Crisis meetings with King Charles and PR teams were hastily arranged, but the tone inside those walls was anything but calm. According to insiders, Camilla was livid. She viewed Catherine's move not just as a challenge but as an open act of hostility. There was talk of betrayal, of humiliation, of fear that everything she had built for her family was about to unravel in the court of public opinion. And in the center of this storm, Charles stood stunned, struggling to reconcile his devotion to both women. William, trapped between two thrones, one of blood, the other of alliance, was left with a choice that no heir should ever have to make. Support the woman who had carried his legacy, protected his children, and stood beside him through scandal and scrutiny? Or remain loyal to a father who had fought tooth and nail to legitimize a second marriage the world never fully accepted? Sources close to the couple revealed that William's silence wasn't neutrality, it was strategy. Because whatever move he made next would redefine the monarchy's future, and he knew that history would remember. As tensions flared within royal halls, the family was urgently summoned to Balmoral for what one insider described as an emergency summit. Everyone came except Catherine. Her absence sent a chilling message. She wasn't negotiating anymore. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a line in the sand, and she had already crossed it. The coronation planning was thrown into limbo. Was it cancelled? Delayed? Would someone else stand beside William when the crown was placed? Even the staff, hardened by decades of royal crisis, whispered that they'd never seen the palace this fractured. Then came the public's voice, and it was deafening. Social media ignited with an outpouring of support for Catherine. Hashtags like "Queen on her terms" and "Blood before favor" trended within hours. The media, initially stunned by the leak, now pivoted toward painting Catherine as a principled protector of tradition. Public opinion, long the monarchy's invisible hand, was tipping the scale. For the first time in decades, the future queen had become more powerful outside the palace walls than within them. But even as the monarchy reeled publicly, a more dangerous drama was unfolding behind closed doors, with Camilla fighting not just for her family, but for her place in royal history. Queen Camilla wasn't about to be erased without a fight, and what followed was a private showdown between two royal women that would change the monarchy forever. The tension had reached its boiling point, and Camilla, never one to quietly accept humiliation, demanded a private audience with Catherine. It was a meeting that had been avoided for months, a clash of silence and simmering rage. But this time, the silence shattered. Behind closed doors, voices rose. According to palace insiders, the conversation began civilly, but quickly spiraled into a fierce exchange. Camilla, red with fury, accused Catherine of orchestrating a calculated attempt to erase her from the institution she had fought so hard to be accepted into. "You're not preserving the crown," she allegedly snapped. "You're rewriting it to bury me." For the first time, their mutual distaste shed its royal mask. There was no decorum left. Just two women standing on opposite ends of history, battling for control over what the monarchy would become. In the days that followed, Camilla's allies moved fast. Long-dormant rumors about Catherine, claims of tension with staff, alleged moments of coldness, and strategic ambition began leaking to the tabloids. The stories were subtle but piercing, painting Catherine not as a defender of legacy, but as a cunning force disrupting the peace. Camilla's team knew they couldn't win through titles or bloodlines, so they fought through whispers and ink. They framed Catherine's actions as divisive, dangerous, even unroyal. And while the public remained largely on Catherine's side, the royal household began to fracture under the weight of two competing narratives. Charles, already overwhelmed by the firestorm his son's wife had ignited, found himself caught in a storm of his own making. He owed Camilla everything she had, stood beside him through scandal, ridicule, and resistance. Yet now, that loyalty clashed with the roaring public support for Catherine, the woman who would one day sit on the throne beside his heir. The pressure on him was unbearable. A decision had to be made, and no matter where his heart leaned, his crown trembled under the consequence. Each day he delayed brought more fallout. Every second he hesitated further cracked the illusion of royal unity. And beneath the surface of personal conflict, something far more dangerous was unfolding. The line between tradition and modernity wasn't just blurred, it was obliterated. This wasn't merely a dispute about family roles, it was a battle over identity. Should the monarchy evolve by inclusion, or fortify its future through bloodline preservation? The very question split royalists, staffers, and even extended members of the royal circle. The institution had weathered divorces, abdications, and scandals, but nothing like this. Nothing that shook the monarchy from within with such quiet violence. And perhaps the most shocking twist of all? Rumors began to circulate that Camilla was considering walking away from public duties altogether. That she had told Charles, in the privacy of their residence, that if her family was to be banished from the royal future, she had no reason to stand on the balcony pretending all was well. If true, it was a threat of seismic consequence. Camilla wasn't merely threatening to step down, she was daring the monarchy to choose between preserving her dignity or keeping peace with the people. But just when tensions reached their peak, an unexpected royal figure would step in and tip the scale in the most shocking way. The Princess Royal had remained silent for years, but as the monarchy teetered on the edge of implosion, Anne emerged with words that stunned even the king. For a woman known for her loyalty to duty and disdain for spectacle, Princess Anne's silence during the escalating crisis had been both expected and unsettling. She watched from the shadows as the institution her mother built unraveled beneath the weight of competing egos and diluted bloodlines. But when the crown itself stood at risk of compromise, when whispers of Camilla's family inheriting the stage, once reserved for sovereign heirs, turned from rumor to near reality, Anne decided it was time to speak. And when she did, the entire royal family listened. The moment was unlike anything seen in decades, a closed-door gathering of only four: Charles, William, Catherine, and Anne. No advisors, no courtiers, just blood. Anne came not with rage, but with clarity, and in her hand, she held a letter that would send shockwaves through the royal core. It was a sealed message from Queen Elizabeth II, written months before her passing. Its contents, never revealed publicly, were said to express the late monarch's vision for the future. Not a future blurred by inclusion for appearance's sake, but one protected by heritage. The words reportedly read, "The crown must remain with those of the blood. It is not kindness that preserves the monarchy. It is a lineage." The weight of the letter fell hard on Charles. For a man who had struggled his entire life to balance emotion and obligation, the voice of his late mother shattered whatever resolve he had left to protect Camilla's extended family. According to one insider, Charles looked away as Anne read the final line, his hands trembling slightly, as if decades of rebellion, compromise, and controversy were finally catching up with him. That letter was not just a mother's opinion, it was a royal command from beyond the grave. Anne didn't stop there. In a rare move, she declared her full support for Catherine not just privately, but within the sacred walls of royal council. Her words were said to be firm, nearly prophetic. "Ignore her now, and the public will never forgive you. Betray the crown's design, and you lose not just Catherine but the people." It was a warning Charles could no longer sidestep. The voice of the monarchy's most loyal enforcer had taken a side, and it wasn't his. Outside those walls, the ripple was immediate. Although the public never saw the letter, leaks about Anne's stance poured into media circles. Overnight, the narrative shifted again. The royal family's most respected figure, the woman who had served longer, harder, and quieter than most, had broken her silence. And in doing so, she had redrawn the battle lines. Camilla's family, once cautiously embraced by royal reformists, now appeared as intruders disrupting a sacred order. Opinion polls tilted sharply. Editorials demanded that royal titles be restored to their original intent. The pressure on Charles intensified into something near unbearable. And somewhere within that palace, Camilla reportedly collapsed in quiet defeat. Allies close to her claimed she cried for hours behind closed doors, not out of rage, but because she knew what Anne's stance truly meant. The battle was no longer between two women, it was between legacy and revision. And with Anne now standing beside Catherine, the outcome seemed inevitable. With Anne's legendary voice behind her, Catherine's path was clear, but the final blow would come not from her words, but from a hidden royal decree. Buried in the archives of Windsor was a decree from Queen Elizabeth herself, a sealed wish that had never seen the light of day, until now. It was unearthed, not by design, but by timing. As tensions soared and the monarchy grappled with its identity, a team of royal archivists was instructed to revisit personal correspondences and ceremonial records left behind by the late queen. The search was routine until it wasn't. Tucked inside a velvet-lined envelope marked with Elizabeth's personal crest was a document that would bring the crisis to its tipping point. Handwritten in the Queen's unmistakable script, the letter carried no date visible to the public, no official heading, just a seal, and a truth the monarchy had tried to outrun. The contents were staggering in their simplicity. In it, Queen Elizabeth expressed her unshakable belief that once her reign ended and Charles assumed the throne, only direct blood descendants should carry forward the public duties and ceremonial weight of the crown. The words were not cruel, but they were final. No matter how much the monarchy modernized, it was, in her view, a line of succession, not a blended family portrait. That decree, though never publicly shared during her life, now stood as her final directive, a royal boundary drawn with absolute clarity. When Catherine read the letter, she reportedly broke down in private. Not from triumph, but from sheer release. For years, she had carried the burden of protecting tradition without any tangible assurance that she wasn't fighting alone. And now, here it was, an echo from the past, validating every fear, every instinct, and every moment she had been dismissed or doubted. The Queen's words were not just permission, they were a mandate. And Catherine, no longer a lone voice, now carried the authority of legacy itself. For Charles, the moment was excruciating. Torn between the woman he loved and the mother whose legacy he had spent his entire life defending, he had no path left that did not lead to sacrifice. But the words were clear. Camilla's family was never meant to be part of the official royal machinery, not in titles, not in ceremony, not in line. And with the Queen's decree now exposed, any attempt to deny that truth would risk not just scandal but collapse. And so, the decision came swiftly. Camilla's stepchildren were formally withdrawn from all future royal planning. Their appearances erased from upcoming coronation materials, their names removed from ceremonial drafts. It was not a public humiliation, but it was decisive. What had once been a creeping influence was now excised with royal precision. The monarchy, for the first time in months, had direction again, and it was Catherine's. A revised coronation plan was quietly approved, reshaped entirely to reflect the Queen's vision and Catherine's demands. The roles were reallocated, the symbolism recalibrated. And in every line, the future became unmistakably clear. This monarchy would not be shared. It would be restored. And with the Queen's final words now guiding the future, the stage was finally set, not just for a coronation, but for the rebirth of a monarchy shaped by Catherine's will. She stood at the gates of power and demanded change, and now, with history behind her and the crown ahead, Catherine stepped into destiny, but only on her terms. The day had arrived, not in the shadow of compromise, but under the full blaze of restored legacy. The coronation of Catherine, once cast into doubt, now unfolded with absolute clarity. No concessions, no half-measures. The royal program, revised and stripped of controversy, bore no trace of Camilla's extended family. The procession, steeped in centuries of symbolism, had been recalibrated to reflect bloodline, not affiliation. It was not a coronation molded by politics, it was a reclaiming of tradition shaped by conviction. As Catherine and William walked side by side into Westminster Abbey, the crowd rose in thunderous applause. The air outside pulsed with something rare, unified awe. For the first time in a generation, the monarchy stood not on apology or adaptation, but on principle. Every step Catherine took down that ancient aisle was earned, not gifted. She had stood against an entire system, resisted the pressure to yield, and in doing so, had ignited something no one could deny: a restoration of what the crown had once meant. Blood, legacy, destiny. Her speech was brief, but unforgettable. With grace and steel, she invoked the women who had shaped her path. She paid tribute to Queen Elizabeth, the sovereign who had left behind more than a throne. She left a blueprint. She spoke of Princess Diana, whose memory lived on not just in her son, but in the moral clarity she brought to the institution. And she cast her eyes toward the future, vowing to uphold an unshaken tradition, one that would never again bend for convenience or sentiment. It wasn't defiance, it was protection, of lineage, of order, of the monarchy itself. Camilla was present, but she was no longer central. She arrived quietly, kept to the margins, and sat without her family beside her. There were no titles offered, no ceremonial roles granted. The crowd greeted her politely, but the message was clear. The age of inclusion at the expense of inheritance was over. The page had turned, not with fury, but with finality. Across the United Kingdom, bells rang and flags waved, not just for a queen, but for a woman who had dared to say no when it mattered most. Catherine's courage was not merely recognized, it was celebrated. The people saw in her not just royalty, but resolve. They saw a queen who didn't inherit a crown, she defended it. And in doing so, she redefined what it meant to wear it. This was not the continuation of a dynasty, it was the rebirth of one. A monarchy not weakened by modernity, but steeled by sacrifice. And at its heart stood a woman who had walked through fire with her children behind her, and the future ahead. And though the crown now rests upon her head, Catherine knows the cost of power and the silent wars that must be fought to protect the soul of a kingdom. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.